That is correct. We're going to stay focused on our core business and talk about how we're moving the needle for kids. And I'm excited that we now have an update coming up for all of you on the status of high dosage tutoring in our district. I want to thank our district's Director of Teaching and Learning, Ms. Kate Canaan, for being here. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Kingsley. Good evening, Board of Directors, Cabinet, those still in attendance and those watching. I do have to say, happy School Librarians Day. Today, add to the celebration the mix of everything. Just since I have the mic, a shout out to all of our staff that lead from our libraries and our media centers, ensuring students have that love of books, love of reading, and they're equipped for this information-rich world. So, yeah, it's National School Librarian Day. So, and thank you for that last vote to also support that. So thank you. Not our topic though. High dosage tutoring about, let's see, a little over a year ago, if not 2 years ago, as federal and state funding started to become available to school districts to help address the impacts of pandemic era learning, we asked our community, what would you like to see as part of those strategies? And one of those items in that input and that feedback from the community was high dosage tutoring. So thank you to the community for that. So tonight, we wanted to update on high dosage tutoring. There are 4 areas that we're going to review tonight. The first one is we did feel it might be a good time to back up a little bit and review what is high dosage tutoring and how is PSD implementing it. We will share some data about implementation thus far. The third thing is, and in partnership with Dr. Schmitz, we will be sharing some of the impact that we're seeing from implementation. Little sneak preview, we are seeing positive impacts from this intense level of support for students. So we'll dig into that a little bit, and then lastly, we'll try to wrap it up a little bit quicker with what are some next steps, knowing that a large piece of next steps is a deeper analysis once this school year concludes, and we have a full year of implementation, more data that would include this spring, as well as that full year of outcome data that we can look at and have those end of year measures. So high dosage tutoring is a dedication of grant funding, both again federal and state, to address the impacts of pandemic era learning. We know as a system we continue to invest in strategies, multiple strategies, to accelerate the learning for all students. So I wanted to pause and really start by saying that high dosage tutoring has been an example of this entire system very quickly shifting and iterating to deploy a very intense support to students that need it the most, while all of the adults in the system and all the humans in the system were also dealing with the pandemic. It was a big lift. And I cannot say how proud I am of everyone involved and just want to celebrate them. Our students that are involved in tutoring, though they're working with tutors, they're building those relationships. A huge thank you to our families. Our families continue to partner with our schools to talk about their students' success, their strengths, their progress, what other needs may exist. So thank you to our families, and especially again those who have been involved in tutoring, because that may have involved making some changes or shifts in their schedules to allow for that. A thank you to all the people that have stepped up to tutor. We have had community members come in and be hired to be tutors. Current staff are also doing their normal job, and they've stepped up and they're tutoring. Substitute teachers, student teachers, retired teachers. We also have built partnerships with external service providers who are able to deploy tutors in our schools. So to everyone who's tutoring and taking that extra time, thank you. All of our schools have identified a high dosage tutoring site facilitator. They're the liaison to helping coordinate and implement this. Those site facilitators, some of them are administrators, academic deans, MTSS coordinators, lead teachers, classroom teachers that are maybe doing this out of a leadership opportunity, or they just saw the power in this support for students. So all those individuals very full plates already, dealing with the pandemic, said, I want to step up and help make this happen. So thank you to our site facilitators. And there's a lot here in this implementation of high dosage tutoring that's behind the scenes that is not known. So central office, thank you also. HR, payroll, Diane Dickerson, IT, Betsy Westbury and her team, procurement and finance, especially Chrissy Easton and Mariah Ortiz. Those departments helped us figure out all the processes, and they were supportive that we got the tutoring to students as quickly as possible, and we didn't wait for every single process to be perfect. They've been very flexible, they've made adjustments, and we've been figuring it out. So thank you to all of them. Thank you again to our teaching and learning team, especially the MTSS facilitators, those folks from other departments that have had the awareness of tutoring to help problem solve for individual situations and make it happen. And Ann Curvin on our team, from a budget perspective, and Bianca Katz on our team, they've frankly saved me, I'll be honest, they saved me. They became our liaison to those external service providers. They made those connections that I flat out just didn't have the capacity to do. So to everyone that has stepped up during a difficult time and a tough time, man, we have stepped up to get this support to students, so thank you for that. So back to this slide and the intent of exploring high dosage tutoring, we know that pandemic era learning had different effects on our students. So as we continue to work with schools to address that, we continue to maintain the priority of start with our students on the academic side are showing that they're performing below the 35th percentile in reading and math, and they're not showing the expected growth. In addition to that, any of our students at the high school level that may be off track to accrue their graduation credits. So when we work with our schools, this is often the starting point. When we look at what resources we have and what additional supports we might provide, start here with these students, what's in place already, and might high dosage tutoring be another layer to add. We know that our schools may then start to move beyond this group because there may be other types of needs where the resources are important to deploy. We might have students that are right on the bubble or the edge, might be at risk of this. But with high dosage tutoring, there also might be students that we're noticing, oh, I'm seeing a gap, and I think if we hit that intensely and quickly, we could probably fill that and we'd be okay, we wouldn't be here. But this is always where we start with our schools. Zooming out, high dosage tutoring is only one of multiple strategies, and we said we didn't want to lose sight of that tonight. So this is certainly not an exhaustive list of strategies, but we know, as we just heard, that high quality evidence-based universal instruction and materials, how important that is for our students. Shoring that up, always striving to make that better is really important. That, in addition to MTSS layers of support, whether that be that differentiation at the universal level, targeted small group intervention, or intensive intervention, that high dosage tutoring is a piece of that. We also have really put a lot of effort and attention and resources to that summer continuity of learning and engagement. We rely on our community partners, and really I would say that the base of all of that, not last on the list, but the base of that is the engagement and the partnership with our families. So in addition to high dosage tutoring being just one of these strategies, again, many elements of the work that we're putting into our strategic plan are focused on those top two bullets and ensuring that those, we continue to improve those, and we also look for those common best practices across all of our schools. So we're going to, when we step into what are the features of high dosage tutoring, it might be good to just kind of pause for a moment. High dosage tutoring, what is it? You know, there's features of it, but what is it? Tutoring, whether it's high dosage or not, tutoring is not teaching. Tutoring is intended to reinforce that teaching. It's intended to have a trusted adult right there while I'm practicing those skills that I've learned in teaching. It might also be looking at what's ahead, what are the new concepts, and what are the prerequisite skills we might want to shore up before so we are able to access that new concept and we're able to dig into that. I think I'm going to kind of pop around a little bit on that piece. So the team last year, and thank you to that team that set the context for this implementation, looked at the research that was out there and the features of high dosage tutoring that had the most impact for students during and as we've hopefully pulled out of the pandemic. And those features, and this is something that we have shared before, but just to review this, the features here are what we would want out of high dosage tutoring. So a highly trained tutor or a licensed educator embedded in the school day, serving 4 or fewer students per session. The tutoring would occur 3 or more times a week, 45 to 60 minutes for about 6 to 8 week cycles before we reevaluate and determine if we're seeing the progress and the response to that we wanted. So maybe we drop off and we don't need the tutoring anymore, or perhaps we need to increase the intensity. Focus on literacy and math, and of course the importance of the tutor collaborating with the teacher on the needs of the students, because we do, frankly, run the risk at times of the strategies at the universal level, classroom instruction, perhaps layering on intervention, perhaps layering on a tutor. If all those individuals have different strategies and it's not aligned, we run a risk of confusing the students even more. So that alignment there and that collaboration is critical. I find myself often, over the past, I guess it's been about a year now with this, refer to this as the research bar. But as we start to implement this, we recognize the need to customize high dosage tutoring for the student, groups of students, the school, the situation. So we didn't want this list or these features to become, you can't do or try to start high dosage tutoring if you can't check mark every single one of these. Because what we noticed, and we know of students, if I have areas of need, I tend to not want to do those things as much. If I've got more time in my day that I'm spending with that, my day is extended for those things, that actually might be a demotivator for me. However, flip side of that, for some of our students, that dedicated time with a trusting adult or having a safe space to extend my school day, it's absolutely critical. We know that we need that. So that customization was important for us. Thinking about these features, we also started to see a difference age of students. So our younger students, we started to see, it might be 4 or 5 times a week, but only for 20 to 30 minutes. Our older students who have a very busy schedule, it may only be 2 times a week, but we're pushing 75 to 90 minutes for those. So again, we wanted this to be, here's what we're striving for, but don't not do anything because you feel like you're not reaching this perfectly. Now, I will say, I've had very few, but I have had a couple times where a question has come to me of, might those resources and those funds be available to us if we had a tutor pop in twice a semester for an hour? That's a little too far away from the research bar. So we have also communicated with our schools that some of what high dosage tutoring is not. So high dosage tutoring is certainly not meant, whoops, sorry, my slides got messed up down here. The tutoring is not remedial work. It's also not a punishment. It's not something where we want to sentence students to having tutoring all year long. It should be fluid. We should evaluate it. We should decide how we're adjusting it as we go along. Continue to stress that tutoring is not a replacement for universal instruction in that content area classroom. It doesn't replace elective classes. It certainly doesn't replace something like recess. It's not a substitute for the other interventions that are already in place in the school or services with the support of an IEP. Tutoring it also isn't totally solely for struggling students. Again, it may be that short dose that we want to put in to tighten things up so that students can be successful. That next one I'd like to touch on a little bit more, treated as an optional offering for PSD schools, because there's really two parts of this. The first part of that is that the resources available to us were available to all of our schools. So we didn't treat this as a pilot. We didn't, identify that there's more need here, so you get a certain portion. It was available to all of our schools. And all of our schools have worked on how would they implement it. But the other side of this one is that it wasn't optional from, perhaps it's like a tutoring open lab that a student at any time could pop in for helping. We really want to dedicate these funds and identify the students that would benefit the most from it. So it is the school partnering with the student and the family to say, we think this is a support that would be beneficial, so we're going to schedule it on at a set time and follow through with that. And then the last 4 bullets here really are just the exact opposite of what high dosage tutoring is in that research bar. So it's not high dosage tutoring if we have one tutor with 20 to 25 students. So as we implemented, and it really was about this time last year, I think it was right before spring break when we really started to push and communicate with all of our schools. We started with 5 models, and schools, again, depending on the student and the situation, could choose any hybrid of these. They didn't have to just pick one and stick with that for all situations. Model 1, in person, embedded during the school day. Model 2, still in person, but outside, so before or after school. Both models 3 and 4 are virtual tutoring. Model 3 is intended that it was on a very set schedule. This week, I will meet with my virtual tutor on these days at this time. Model 4 was intended, the on-demand was more that it might be a more complex or dynamic schedule. This week, I'm meeting these 3 days at this time in the morning, but next week I've got to switch to these 2 days and it's in the evening. So what we found is that was a little confusing because I think we think of on-demand differently. That's more like I can pop in whenever I want, and that can become more like homework help, and that again doesn't meet the criteria for high dosage tutoring. So it was Model 4 is more virtual on a dynamic schedule. And then Model 5 was calling out that it could be any of the other 4, but it was focused on credit recovery and that credit accrual for graduation. A learning that we've had from this, that we are going to streamline a little bit for next school year, is that we are going to go down to just the first 3 models, because again, Model 4, we track which students are involved in this high dosage tutoring, what that schedule is, what their participation is in our student information system in Synergy. And so that can handle any sort of schedule. So Model 4, we don't really need to call out separately anymore. And Model 5, when that information is tracked in Synergy, there is a field where our site facilitators can list the course ID number that we're working towards that credit for. So they can do that separately in Synergy, and they can just choose Model 1, 2, and 3, and we'd still have that information about credit recovery. So you'll start to see that next year we'll be referencing just Model 1, 2, or 3, because we are interested in learning from what is the difference between in-person or virtual? What is the difference between embedded during the day or done outside of the day, so we can learn from that. As schools started to see how this could look for them, we saw very concrete decision points and action steps. First one being student criteria: which students do we think will benefit from high dosage tutoring? The second action point or decision point was, again, which delivery model? In-person or virtual? What do we know about this small group of students or the student? Which one do we think would be best? The third decision point is about which tutors. Do we want to hire our own PSD tutor, or do we want to partner with that external service provider and have them help to deploy one of their tutors to our school or connect virtually? This year, we did enter into agreement with 6 external service providers. This was a first for me. That agreement was more of a, our schools may work with you. They may reach out to you and see if this would work. Of the 6, about half of those we did work with, and Axiom Learning was one of a strong partnership that we've built. The Axiom Learning, a thank you to them. They really were able to respond to what our schools were trying to do and the way that they were doing it. The 4th decision point then became, are we going to do this during the day or outside of the school day? Outside of the school day, I want to say a thank you, a pre-thank you to Jeff and the transfer. You may or may not know this actually yet at this point, but the transportation team has been wonderful to work with, because we know anytime we start to talk about support outside of the school day, what if transportation becomes the barrier? Tutoring by nature makes the routing puzzle quite a puzzle, because we are talking only, not every single day, very small group of students, short time, and after 6 to 8 weeks, it may be different students. So I know transportation is going to be there to help when we have that situation. So far, we've asked our schools if that becomes what might be the reason a student can't be tutored, we will problem solve that. We will figure that out. So far, that we have not needed to step into that. Our schools are creative, leveraging other resources, getting creative about scheduling, but I know our team would be there probably when that happens, not if. So, okay, so that was a lot of context setting. Thank you for that. Next, I'd like to step into some of the data that we're seeing from the implementation that started in Q4 of last year, last summer, and then what we've seen so far this fall. Okay. So the first thing I'd like to share are just counts. So school involvement as well as students. And this was pulled from Synergy. It is looking at unique student ID numbers. And you'll see, and I have a little more information here of the breakdown of this, but we did, when we started last year at this time, we had 11 schools starting the tutoring and tracking that in Synergy. That was about 10, well, not about, it was 10 elementary schools and 1 secondary school. 135 students, 118 of which were elementary. So a little difference there. In the summer, that increased to 16 schools, 11 of which were elementary, 333 students, 245 which were elementary. This fall, and the count here for the fall was really, we limited it to the actual cycle happened during the fall semester. So we kind of cut it off, if you will, and we only looked at the fall. Increased to 36 of our schools and 864 students. So the split there was 24 elementaries to 12 secondary and 527 elementary students, which of our elementary students, that's about 5%, and 337 secondary students, which is about 2% of our secondary students. And then you can see here on the slide, combined, the 864 is about 3% of our students. This is, I think, for me, interesting to pause at this point and say, 3%, is that appropriate? Is that too few? Is that too many? Where are we? How could we gauge this? And so if we do, I pull up the image of the MTSS instruction and intervention pyramid, and typically, and I'm going to stress that word typically, we would see 95 to 97% of our students responding positively to universal instruction and layered on small group targeted intervention. If we add on that top layer of support, keep that in place, and we add on very intense intervention, one-on-one, high frequency, duration, we would expect 95 to 97% of our students to respond. I think I just got all my numbers off, didn't I? Did I? You got me. You got me. So that is how we defined high dosage tutoring. So that it's kind of interesting there. But again, typically, I don't know post, when we look at the impacts of pandemic era learning, I'm not sure we're in a typical time. The other thing is we know that we had more students, or excuse me, more schools starting to implement this spring and more students this spring. So we are up to 48 schools that have implemented this spring. And if we are, well, we'll save that. There was a question about, and I was able to pull today, and this is an estimate because I did it rather quickly, but if I looked at tutoring cycles just this spring and looked at unique IDs, I would estimate right now we're up to about 1,200 students, and that's about 4.5% of our students. Switch now a little bit from individual students to the groups that we have tracked in Synergy. Again, showing on these slides from Q4 to the summer to the fall now. The total groups that we had in Synergy went from 18 last quarter, 58 over the summer, all the way up to 530 in the fall. Below that, you see a breakdown across the different models. I do want to point out, because my mathematical brain, you'll see that some of those totals don't add up if you work up vertically. That is because we did have some, the model wasn't selected in Synergy, and we'll clean that up and get that fixed. But hopefully here we're seeing a pretty clear pattern of preference towards in-person. May make sense when we think of pandemic era learning. If students were not positively impacted by that, it might have been that virtual component and factor there. But we're not going to use this data to say we're going to stop all virtual tutoring. We know that there are still benefits and reasons for that. One being that we had a student heard the story that partnering with our external service provider, they were able to get a tutor that spoke in the student's native language of Pashto. We don't have that resource readily available to us. That was huge. That student is seeing such growth because of being able to have that tutoring in their native language. Another look at this is what were the focus areas of these groups. So the breakdown here of math compared to literacy compared to graduation credit. That graduation credit number I think is small there because our site facilitators might have picked math versus the graduation credit, but again, we'll be able to look at that through the course IDs at the end of the school year. The adults involved in all of this, the tutors, some more data here. Last school year, through our employee reports from HR, 98 tutors hired. As of the end of February, 307. The external service providers, that was not in place last school year, but this school year we are estimating that we've deployed about 135 from those partnerships, and 40 of which roughly have been virtual. Last thing before we start to shift into what is the impact that we've seen so far is the budget piece of what's supporting this from a financial resource. So we've had 3 avenues of funding to support high dosage tutoring, 2 of which are grant-based that have deadlines by which we need to expend the funds, and the funds have to go towards strategies to address the impact of pandemic era learning. So the first one we have are federal grant funds, commonly referred to as ESSER, about $2.2 million there. Those need to be expended by September of '24. So we have a school year and a little bit. The second source that we have is a competitive state grant for about 2.6. That 2.6 is a carryover from our award last year, plus a new award this year. These funds need to be expended by June of '24. Again, another school year, and then to June. And then lastly, we do have general fund COVID response reserves. Those are the reserves that we have that when we see the need can go towards this, and 2.9 of that reserve has been assigned to high dosage tutoring. So where we are, last fiscal year's expenses did come out of the federal grant. So far this year, and what we'll continue to use through June of this fiscal year, is going to come from the state grant. We are anticipating, because again, it's still happening, we're anticipating that about 1.2 million will be able to carry over. We were approved for a carryover for next year. So we do, the state and the federal carryover would be available through next school year, June and ish up into that September of the 24-25 school year. But then in 24-25, we do have the COVID response reserve to support. So, or at that point, maybe seeking additional funding. My hope is we continue to learn and iterate from this. What can we embed in other ways in our existing system? And I will stop with that there. So impacts that we are seeing so far. Again, I sneak preview, we are seeing positive impacts. Someone happened to just email me last night some celebrations from tutoring. So Laura Sutton, assistant principal, and her colleague at Shepherdson have been working to implement high dosage tutoring, and she shared that, she's sent multiple pages, but in particular a third grader last year at the end of second grade on reading maps was at the 3rd percentile. They were able to deploy tutoring. Student now has bumped up to the 36th percentile. A 4th grader has grown from the 29th to the 37th percentile. And the one that tugs at my heartstrings is a 4th grader after being involved in tutoring. He now calls himself a reader. Before, he would tell people he didn't know how to read, but now his confidence is through the roof. We also have a testimonial here from a principal, along with some photos, about a student that after the tutoring completed a final draft of writing, and they celebrated that and posted that work. Actually, the one from the site facilitator here, that actually was last May. That was shared with me, of how important it was for a high school student to work with their tutor before school because of their anxiety before 2,000 more students just showed up. A testimonial from a classroom teacher about the growth that they saw from their students, as well as one directly from a tutor about the excitement and the engagement of the student during tutoring. So a few testimonials there, and then I'm going to turn it to Dwayne to talk a little bit more about the impacts we're seeing on the actual outcome measures. Perfect.
Thank you, Kate. Hello, everybody. Okay, so we're going to jump right into some other information. I have to say I love working with Kate. I always breathe easy when she's involved in any project in PSD because it's well organized and carried out extremely well. At any rate, so high dosage tutoring, I want to point out as we launch into this, the question is really, does high dosage tutoring accelerate learning for the kids that are participating? And the way that we're going to answer that is we're going to evaluate the students that were experiencing the model implementation of Model 1 and Model 2. Kate just showed us some data that Model 3, 4, and 5, if you remember, those N counts were real thin. So there's not enough data there to do a really robust job of talking about, how impactful it was from a statistical perspective, right? So we are going to focus on Model 1 and 2, and we're going to look at Acadian's data, and we're going to look at MAP data in both reading and math. In order to answer the question, did HDT accelerate learning, what we're going to do is create a match comparison group, student, for every student that we had HDT tutoring, that we can evaluate them because we have gain scores, right? So we matched students on 7 variables. 6 of them are characteristics you can see there, and 1 of them is their fall, achievement score, if you will. After we matched these students up, we start to calculate how much growth did the match comparison group achieve versus how much did the HDT group achieve, right? And just to ground us a little bit real quickly, we're going to talk in terms of these growth effect sizes, which are in standard deviation units in the column on the left, but they can be directly translated to equivalent changes in the percentile range or percentile rank of students, okay? So if a student gets a 1/5 or 0.2 of a percentile unit gain, that's the same exact thing as moving from the 50th percentile to the 58th percentile, like an 8 percentile unit gain. So that table, I just put it in there to remind us there's an easy translation. All those, by the way, if you look at on the right column, the 8 percentile points gain, the 10, the 13, the 19, those align with what Kate was just telling on the personal stories of some individual students. Those are pretty outstanding gains for students in reading and or math. We're going to jump to some quick statistical analysis because really we're asking, are the gains significant? Just not were there gains, but are they significantly different? Are they significantly more? Meaning not likely due to chance. To show you visually what's going on, when we take the upper graph that we're looking at, that's a little bar graph, of the prior achievement scores of students that were in the control group, and the lower graph is the prior achievement scores of the students that received HDT, you can see those two graphs are identical. That's because we went in and specifically selected them to be identical. So they, in other words, they have the same starting point academically as measured by, in this case, Acadians. When we flash forward through the fall semester to the end of the fall semester and the winter test scores, the top graph again are the students that did not receive HDT, and the graph on the bottom is for the students who did. You can notice two things. Relative to one another, those two groups relative to each other, there's less of the lower scores towards the negative end of the scale for the kids who experienced HDT, and there's more of a shift to the right, or scores on the higher end of the scale, for the students who experienced HDT. So just visually real quick, that is what we're looking at, like their prior scores compared to their post scores, and did those distributions shift left, right, relative to one another. But a way to speed ourselves up and look at that and answer the question, were there gains, and were those gains statistically significant? We do a paired samples type of a test. And basically, what we're looking at here is we're going to look at 3 slides in a row. This one's for the Acadians reading data. So all the kids for whom we have that type of data are illustrated here. There's 242 of those students, so that's a lot of information. And you can see that on average, that group gained 0.31 of a standard deviation unit, which is equivalent to 12 percentile points gains. That's like, on average, a student going from the 50th percentile up to the 62nd. Or if they started at the 40th percentile, growing all the way to the 52nd. That's a big deal. And that happened on average for these students. So did we accelerate learning through HDT? The answer is clearly yes, based on these data. Okay? When we look at the data, similar type data, but for map reading, it's not the identical students because there's different grade ranges going on, and we don't want to go too deep into the weeds right now, just to kind of move us along. But at any rate, there's 128 students that are involved in this, both in the match comparison group and in the HDT group. On average, the HDT group had 0.38 standard deviations of additional gain or acceleration relative to the match comparison group. And that's equivalent to 15 percentile points gained. So again, based on the map data, it's telling us the same thing, that yes, kids did accelerate their learning that were involved in HDT. Moving on to the last data pile, which is the math data for maps, we see the same type of thing where the two groups are different and that the gains were 0.28 of a standard deviation unit or 11 percentile units. That's substantial, and it's statistically significant. That's the bottom right-hand corner in each one of these. It shows that little p-value is less than 0.05. That means it's not likely due to chance. There's something else going on, and I think Kate just did a great job of talking about what that something is, right? Okay. Another question we'll hit real quick. There's a lot of things we can delve into and that we do delve into behind the scenes. We're just hitting a few highlights for the board tonight. An obvious question is, since we're focusing on Model 1 and Model 2, did one of them outperform the other just as a model of delivery? Because if that had happened, it'd be interesting to know, right, as we move forward. Well, what this data shows you is that the two models were virtually the same on their outcomes, 0.32 and 0.31 in essence, standard deviation unit gains across those two different models. And you can see that significance number in that bottom right-hand corner now is 0.806, clearly not less than 0.05. So those two models are not different than each other. They're not significantly different, okay? One model appears to do as well as the other. That's the Acadians data, moving along quickly. This is the MAP literacy data, same exact story. Look at that 0.832 significance. They both had super high acceleration rates, 0.362, 0.392. So they both worked really well. It's probably a matter of fitting the student with the model that they need. And then looking at the math map data, same type of story. No significant difference between the two type of model types. Both model types are evidence of acceleration in learning. There is, the last point I'm going to hit before I hand this back over to Kate, is there are differences. This is a short list of the tutor data. I just want to point out to the board that we also can look at this tutor by tutor. What were the outcomes? Keep in mind, look at the N counts on the right and how small those are compared to those big old group analyses I was doing a second ago. But this is of interest just because different tutors do get different outcomes, and yes, they are working with really small groups of kids. Nonetheless, there's some potential to study what adult practices, tutor practices tend to be associated with the higher outcomes versus the lower outcomes, even though you can see as you scan down that and you can see from the aggregated data above that on balance, our tutors did get really high outcomes and accelerated learning across the board. And with that, I will hand it back to Kate. Thanks, Kate.
Thank you so much for the chance to share. We wanted to try to give a full picture here. So we'll wrap with what have been some of the learnings and the actions and next steps that we see. So far with our implementation, there have been so many multiple entry points, whether that be across our schools, across our site facilitators, across the tutors, the models, et cetera. So we are continuing to work on the efficiency of our processes. The first area of that is with implementation thus far, it really has been, let's get this support to the kids. Let's do it. Let's make it happen. Figure out what you think's going to work. We're going to be maybe 2 steps, unfortunately, behind you, trying to help you make that happen. So it has felt somewhat reactive. And because of those decision points I mentioned earlier, now that we know more, we are going to ask our schools to submit a very short plan about what they're anticipating for high dosage tutoring for this summer, as well as each quarter next school year. That way we have that on the front end and we can actually backwards map. Okay, you do want to work with an external service provider? Okay, we need to, now that we know that now, we've got 3 weeks to make that happen and we know when you're going to start the tutoring. So we will, and we'll also have that information on the front end. What resources do we need to help support that? Also looking, again, just hiring and payroll. How do we make those processes efficient? How do we ensure that our site facilitators who maybe have never needed to work with their office manager to post a job or get hiring approval or verify time and effort, that they know those processes, we train on that, we're there to support them. We also just know so much more now to communicate with our external service providers about what our model is looking like and what our needs are. The agreements that we entered into for this year were just 1-year agreements. So we actually do have an open RFP right now for those partnerships to start to happen. We'll ask some of our site facilitators to help us review those and identify those partnerships for next school year. We hope to possibly narrow how many that we have. We really want to target that and build a partnership there. And then our synergy tracking, again, that data that is very helpful to the schools so they can track participation. They know what's happening, but also for us, again, many of our site facilitators use Synergy, but in a different capacity. So again, supporting them in IT has been, again, wonderful to support all of us with our Synergy learning. The other area of learning, I think it's facing our world right now, is really just human capacity. I think we were so fortunate to have the resource of money to support this, but the resource of people and the resource of time was unfortunately not something that someone could just hand to, not just hand to us, we worked hard for those grants, but our site facilitators, again, already full plates, adding this on the way, I don't know how they've done it. I really don't know how they've done what they've done. But so we're just going to continue to learn how to support them. We are going to be looking at increasing that, how we honor that time through a stipend for them next year. We're going to increase that because we know it took more time. Tutors. Just finding tutors. We have struggled to hire our own, and actually those partnerships with our external service providers, we've had multiple times over the year where they've just had to say, we don't have anyone to fill that request right now. Or maybe we just hired a few more people, we've got to get them trained, so can we start in 2 weeks versus tomorrow type of thing. So it's just this, and across the board, right? Universal instruction, intervention, just the people, talented people there. And I say the same thing goes for our central support. All of our departments, these are similar processes that have existed, but any new program has nuances. And so that the capacity to continue to support this centrally, we got to keep figuring out how we can do that. So to wrap, kind of where we started, that huge thank you to everyone for this heavy lift and quickly deploying this support to students. I'm extremely proud and really humbled by what everyone has done. Next steps, with that dedication of funds to address impact of pandemic era learning. As mentioned before, and I apologize, that bullet isn't exactly correct, we do have that expected funding from the federal and state grant through June of '24, plus a little more into September, plus we have the reserves to take us through the '24-25, we think, school year. But we just want to do that deeper analysis of the cost to benefits, resources to impact, to help us determine what attributes of high dosage tutoring might we continue. I would anticipate that a year from now, and definitely over a year from now, it's going to look different. We're going to iterate, and there may be elements of this, again, that we can embed in our intervention systems, and it's not a separate piece. So that is it. So,
thank you.
Questions?
Are there comments or
Thoughts?
questions from the board? DJ?
Yeah, first of all, on that last slide, I really appreciate the deeper analysis of the cost, benefit, and impact. I think that is, especially at our level, something we need to definitely understand. So I really appreciate you listing that. I had a question about the external agreements you had. Are those guys, are those people, willing to do more than just one-on-one? Are they willing to do the 1-to-4 groups and stuff like that?
Yes, we have that outlined in the agreement that our groups may be anywhere from 1 student to a group of 4. So yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Awesome. And the second question about them was, I was wondering if you guys did the scoring, the effect size for them versus the ones that we hired, and if you saw anything different with that.
So I did, but I don't want to say too much, and especially on camera, about that.
Okay.
But no, they came out with a positive effect size, and we had many of our tutors who came out higher than that effect size, and some that came out lower, so they landed in the mix.
Awesome. Thank you.
Other comments or questions from the board? Nate?
Yes, since we're dealing mostly with the students who are struggling, is it typical that that student would have the instructional level and then an intervention level and also high dosage tutoring on top of that? So there would be all 3 of those things involved?
Yeah, thank you, Nate, for that. It is definitely, yes, that may happen, that a student they have their universal instruction, they may be receiving intervention, small group intervention a couple times a week in that same area, and the tutor. An example of that actually would be that, maybe upper elementary, I'm a 4th grader, and I'm struggling with writing. So during class, when we're working on writing, I'm learning about writing, but maybe my teacher is giving me scaffolds of sentence stems or graphic organizers to organize my thinking before I actually go to the act of writing. My interventionist that I may be working with multiple times a week in a small group, again, maybe giving that opportunity to verbalize my thinking before I go to writing, and they're helping me with my practice. The high dosage tutoring layer may actually be that through that alignment and working with the teacher, we need to actually go back and think about the smallest component of writing a sentence. What is sentence structure? And they might be that deepest level of support there. A piece of that I would also say that we found a benefit from high dosage tutoring is if I'm struggling with writing, I may also be struggling with reading. And so perhaps that intervention time has been dedicated to supporting and layering on for reading. And the school may have been struggling, when are we going to add in a layer for writing? High dosage tutoring has allowed another resource for that. So, but yes, those layers could be there. Not always. If we're seeing a need for a student that we feel like, oh, you know what, there's the other example I think of is a student in geometry in high school. I might be struggling, and the teacher might be like, you know what, if we could get some intense, quick tutoring on the algebra skills, the prerequisite skills needed, let's do that for a short amount of time to help access those geometry skills. So it isn't always that there's all three of those layers, but oftentimes that intense level, yes, it may be there. I think part of, as John spoke about earlier, our hope would be, as our students are resilient, as we continue to improve and enhance our universal and those layers of support, that we wouldn't need that added layer of tutoring. We get back to a point where that would not be needed. So that was a little probably more than you were asking for, but.
Other comments or questions from board members? Jim?
I think I'm good, Rob.
Okay. Yeah, I have to ask you because your face is not on the screen now, so I don't know. Anyway, it looks like not. So again, I would thank you both and all of the folks who worked on this and implemented it in the central office and in the schools. Thank you very much for this work and for helping our students to be successful. Really appreciate it.